Sworn! I've been pretty excited to talk about this game. I've seen this game pop up on my Steam recommendations as well on YouTube. And I've got to say, visually, I was definitely intrigued. And it definitely gave me a Hades vibe. Which, spoiler alert, that's going to be the main topic of this video. This is very much a Hades-like. And, you know, I've said it in the past, I think a lot of games want to be Hades. There's always been certain games that people want to try to replicate. You know, you've got your Souls likes, you've got your Slay the Spire likes, you've got your Vampire Survivor likes. But the thing is, in the case of roguelikes, when you look at Slay the Spire and Vampire Survivors, these are pretty easy games to replicate, all things considered. But trying to do Hades, that's not easy. Now, it's not because the gameplay is complicated, but it's mostly because most of the charm of Hades is just how much there is in it and the overall vibe and the overall immersion and adventure of a game like that. So when games try to be like Hades, generally they don't tend to actually replicate the feeling of Hades as well as I would have hoped for. But this game did a pretty great job, and there's definitely a lot that I want to cover. So let's start with the usual. I want to talk about audio, visuals, and the overall charm. And in this case, I think this particular section is pretty important because, again, Sworn is trying to be Hades. It's not trying to hide it. There are so many similarities. Some I think it's a good idea to have copied. Others, I think they went sometimes a little too far. Visually, the game looks great. Now, it's not exactly the same as Hades. Art style is definitely a little different. It's hard to explain how different, to be honest, but, you know, it just looks great and definitely has a great sense of immersion just from the visuals itself. The VFX and sound design, also great, and let me tell you, every time you hit an enemy, it feels great. You've got this whole rumble around the screen that makes you feel like you're hitting a big attack. Sound really is meaty. It looks and feels great. So visually and sound-wise, that's awesome. In terms of the music, okay, I'm gonna be honest, I like the music, but there's sometimes it's so close to Hades music that it feels a little cheap. Even the menu music, it's a great track. It's just that even without context, I would be like, oh, this kind of sounds like Hades. It's very, and if you've heard Hades, there's a track that's extremely similar to that. Without any spoilers, the final boss, you know, similar, it has a really cool like guitar playing, but when you get to the second stage, the final boss gets all hyped up and then there's a guitar solo happening. It's really, really similar to Hades in that respect as well. But that doesn't mean that there aren't tracks in this game that do feel unique. It's just that, you know, some of the times I felt like, okay, yes, it's very similar to Hades. Doesn't mean I didn't like it. When I heard those tracks, it still sounded cool. But as a musician, sometimes it felt a little plagiarized, slightly. In terms of the overall vibe and tone of the game, I think visually everything fits quite well. It still has a fairly serious tone. There's also voice acting. Now, that being said, the voice acting is not as serious as Hades, and they don't put as much emphasis on the whole voice acting side of things, which is completely understandable. I don't expect games to try to go all the way like Hades did. That's just another level. That being said, when compared to Hades, one thing that's a little sad is I don't care as much for the character I'm playing. And, you know, the whole point is to get to King Arthur, and there is obviously a plot behind a lot of this stuff, but I don't feel as motivated outside of just gameplay like I did in Hades, where I was actually excited to see what would happen at the end from a lore perspective. I didn't feel that in this game, which, again, you know, if it wasn't a Hades-like, I wouldn't say these things. But I do think this game could have actually gone a little bit further to try to really put more importance and like a few more voice acted lines here and there. Considering there already were voice acted lines, I think they could have gone a little bit further to introduce more importance to the plot and really getting to the end. It's not a huge deal, just something I wanted to bring up because I think it could have been even cooler getting to the final boss. Let's talk gameplay. Okay, so gameplay, once again, quite similar. So this is your default character, and you've got your basic attack, which has an inherent combo. You've got your special, which in this case is a swing attack, depending on the weapon you're going to have again. You also have the equivalent of the cast. Boom. you choose your Q, and you have your dash. So very, very similar to Hades 1 in that regard. Now, it feels good. It's not as fast-paced as Hades in terms of the dash does feel quick, but the recharge between the dashes is a little slower. Now, that might seem like a small detail. It does happen. Sometimes it does mean that if I were to attack dash like this, if I'm trying to press spacebar, sometimes the spacebar doesn't activate just because it's still on recharge after the second one, which kind of threw me off at first as someone who was very used to Hades. The one massive upside from this game compared to Hades, I think the biggest thing this game has over Hades is the customization prior to each run. So in this game, instead of just having this guy that I've been playing, there are 4 characters. We've got this guy, we've got Vigilant, we've got the Rook, we've got the Monk. Now, each of these characters have 4 different weapons. Each of these weapons can also be upgraded. Now, some of these upgrades are not going to completely change the weapon, but they are definitely going to add something to it. Your heavy attacks fire an additional arrow. I mean, that's a pretty important upgrade. The cool thing is, you can also flip that to have a different effect. You can choose 2 effects for each of the weapons twice. What I mean by that is that each weapon, you'll have 2 of these major abilities. You can flip them for different effects. They're not usually crazy different like a different version of the weapon in Hades, but they're still pretty unique. But that's not all. You also get to choose your own cast. And there's 4 different ones to pick from. You're like, wow, an additional 4 on top of all that. That's pretty good. 4 for each character. Holy, that's 16 casts. I'm going to call this casts. 16 spells, 16 weapons, 4 characters. Wow, that's cool and impressive, I've got to say. And one of the reasons they put a lot of emphasis on this is because this game also is targeted towards multiplayers. I don't tend to talk much about the multiplayer aspect of roguelikes. I will say I think this game sounds really cool in multiplayer, and maybe this game is much, much, much better in multiplayer. I don't know that. I'm just going to talk about it as a single-player experience because this game is also very easily a single-player experience. And as a single player, having this amount of customization means that every run before even starting, I'm going to start with something different and new because there's just so much you can do. I could play the sword with the blade rush. I could play the bow staff with a different flipped side thing with the assassin's dagger, and then I can just play another character with completely different things. Massive props in that regard. This really definitely does keep the game fresh even after having played for quite a bit, because it does feel like every run starts off unique all the time. Until you've played every single combinations, but you know, there's a lot of combinations, you know? Also, as you can see, the bow, it's exactly the same bow as in Hades. It's exactly the same thing with the charge attack, with the perfect attack. So that does mean that, yeah, the gameplay always feels fresh. Each weapon really do feel different. Each character kind of have their own identity, right? Like this guy is usually very fast-paced. I think he's kind of like in between ranged. This guy is more of a tank, and the monk kind of is like the spellcasters. They all have their kind of identity, but again, with the amount of customizations, they can all be played in very drastically different ways. Now, before talking about the actual runs themselves, I do want to actually touch on the hub here. So the hub is fairly basic. You got your bounty board, similar to Hades in that regard, where you'll get some different currencies for doing certain quests that you can just do automatically. You've got Guinevere, who will permanently unlock major features that you can find within runs, such as, you know, you can find Trials of Combat. You can now have ultimates, that kind of stuff. Once you've gotten all of them, you don't have to worry about them anymore. Similar to Hades in that regard as well. You've got your actual talent tree. This is quite different, and this I do enjoy quite a bit. Hades 1 is very simple with the mirror, right? Here you've got quite a lot of things to do. Now, there's a big skills tree, and you definitely get stronger and stronger by going through those. Now, you might realize I still have not completed all of these, and I've been playing quite a bit. So definitely a very grindy game, but a lot of times the word grindy can be said negatively. In this instance, I don't think it's a negative thing because, once again, while there is a lot of things to unlock, for 300 gems, which I pretty much got all of those in one run, I can get 1.5% more likely to receive rare blessings. Boom. That's one run. Now, early on, the thing is, I think the pacing of these unlocks is done quite well. Early on, you're going to be able to unlock a lot more things in just 1 or 2 runs. You're going to unlock the more important things, such as the dash charge. That's really useful to have early. And later on, things get more expensive. So even though things do feel very, very grindy now, as you look at this, I think it did a good job with balancing the fact that it doesn't feel like you need to be playing early on, because you're still going to be unlocking enough things where every run is going to feel different when you start playing the game. So I think they did a pretty good job overall with the pacing of it. This game has a lot of currencies. All of these guys right there. You've got, the ones that we just talked about for your skill tree. You've got the Ember things, which is to unlock new things to play with. So all of these weapons, all of these characters, and all of these different spell books, you need to unlock them to play with them. Which again, I think is cool, because you don't want all of them at first, because it's going to overwhelm people. And then you could try different ones that you want to test out. The moon shards is once again to get the enhancements, which we talked about. Once you've got all of them, you will not be needing this, but it's great to have early to really add some drastically unique things to each run. This thing, I don't know what you call it, that's for cosmetics, which obviously you wouldn't care about in Hades since it's a single player experience, but in the multiplayer, you definitely want to look different sometimes. So I can have this look, I can have this sword. Now I will say, it's pretty minimalistic right now. I do understand that there's a lot of weapons and a lot of characters, so that makes sense that, there's not a million for each of them. But right now, I can just have one choice for a new sword look, and they're always the same. I wish there was more you could do with that, but that's a small thing. And again, for me, it doesn't really matter because I'm not playing multiplayer, but it's just something to consider. And then lastly, this down there, that's to actually upgrade each individual weapons. And like we talked about, those upgrades are pretty impactful. So there's a lot of currencies, and we're definitely going to be talking about that in a bit. But overall, again, I think they did a pretty good job with the pacing of getting all these currencies and being able to be rewarded for unlocking things as you play runs without feeling too much of a grind. Let's talk about the actual runs. Again, this is going to be very similar to Hades, where you're going to have 3 full biomes and a 4th final biome where you're going to be fighting the final boss. Each biome, you're going to be going from one room to another. You'll have different door options, each showing which rewards you're going to have. You have to kill every enemy. You get your reward. You go to the next area. Rinse and repeat. This is nothing new. Even the door opening from one room to another sounds and looks the same as Hades. But again, they're not trying to hide it. I just find it pretty funny. What can I say? Hades' recipe is great, and it's very similar to Hades, so it's great. It's very satisfying. One thing I will say that I think is better than Hades in this regard is I think room clears are faster. There's less enemies to deal with on average, I feel like. So you do tend to go from one room to another a little faster, which overall I think does help with the pacing. There are certain caveats to that statement that we'll be discussing in just a bit. But overall, I would say, yeah, it's enjoyable. It's done very well. And for me, it's just kind of playing another Hades where I get to discover all the new bosses and all the mini bosses and see all the biomes and everything. All the boons are also different gods. One really nice addition here is that a lot of times you get to choose between 2 gods instead of just being offered just one at random. That's awesome. That's a really, really nice, simple addition that I almost wish Hades would actually give, because sometimes you're really looking for one particular, build and like god, and you don't want to give them everything, but choosing from 1 to 2 occasionally is a really, really nice addition that I really do enjoy. So those are kind of like my overall thoughts on the game. It's a very enjoyable time. If you like Hades, you're very much gonna like this game because it's very similar in all the right ways, I would say. But now I definitely want to talk about more specifics on the positives and on the negatives, because I haven't really talked about any of the things that I struggle with in this game. So let's talk about more of the positives. During runs, you will find a lot more things individually within the rooms. You're gonna find different events. You're gonna find little statues that might give you more currencies if you do a specific things. Hades has that too, but there's a lot to do throughout the run. And one really nice addition to this is that even though there's a lot of currencies that we talked about, but there's a lot of ways to get those currencies. So many events and so many like different things can get you all these currencies that you don't feel too stuck usually having to like, oh, just go for a room reward to get these currencies. No, there's so many ways to get them. So it always feels like you're just being rewarded constantly while playing, and that's an amazing feeling. The equivalent of the anvils in Hades, where you get to actually upgrade your weapon, there's that as well in this game. But one really nice addition in this game is that since you get to choose your weapon and your spell, the anvils can actually upgrade either the spell you chose or the weapon you chose. And again, depending on the combination, that means that each anvil is going to have a mixture of like something unique for the weapon and something unique for the spell, which is really cool. That means that anvils are pretty unique every time. Because, you know, if you play Hades and you grab the bow and you go for the anvil, you always know what the possible upgrade is going to be for the bow. But in this case, you're like, oh, well, I grabbed the sword, but I didn't realize, yeah, I have also the Shadow Strike spell, which means that that's actually a really cool combination of upgrades that could work together. So again, more unique customization that I think this game does very well with. You can find secret shops fairly often, and the secret shops are really, really cool. They give some very fun power-ups that are sometimes temporary, but sometimes permanent, like permanently upgrading a few of your boons, making every future boons in the next 6 rooms higher rarity, which means that you use your money more often, and it's just really nice. There's just so much to do in the runs. It's really enjoyable. Shops are cool. I love the shops because you can heal. You can always heal at the shop, but you don't always just have a single time heal. You can spend as much money healing. If you have 1,000 gold, you can spend the first 50 on the heal, then 100 for a second heal, 150 on the third heal, 200 on the fourth heal. You can, as long as you have money, you can always be at full health, which is great. A really simple, cool system that I think a lot of action roguelikes can take example of, because then that means that gold is always useful to a certain extent. And if balanced correctly, in this case it is, I think it's very enjoyable. I do want to talk about now some of my things that I hope do get tweaked that I wish were a little different. One of them is the lock-on mechanic. So, if you're playing with a controller, which, to be honest, the game does say that the experience should be experienced with the controller. Since, as a Hades player that plays on the mouse and keyboard, I want to go mouse and keyboard. And that's an option. Now, they've added a lock-on feature, and I think that's really cool, right? So right now, if I press a button, boom, I'm locked onto this target. And similar to, you know, like a lot of Souls-likes, right? How, like, my character's always facing this character, and I'm always going to be looking at it. Now, the thing about this lock-on, though, is I can't aim anymore, which I guess makes sense, right? But in this instance, it's a little weird, because if I want to switch targets, I have to do it manually, and there is a button to switch targets, but in a game this fast, differently than like a Souls games are very slow pace. This is a very fast pace. You're going to be surrounded by enemies at times. You're not going to have time to switch targets so that your aim can go from one target to another, which again, on controller, I can understand, but on mouse and keyboard, what ends up happening is you don't really use the lock-on because it's just not worth it. Now, that's fine. That means you don't get to use it, right? But that means that I can't move this camera any differently. And sometimes I want to look a little bit more to the left. In the Hades, wherever you're looking at, the camera is going to be slightly pushed towards that location, at least to my understanding. At least that's how it feels like. It just doesn't feel as good here, where sometimes I just want to be able to see a little further away, and I kind of wish I could just use the lock-on like this, but if you're mouse and keyboard and there's more than one enemy, not worth it. I kind of wish I could lock on but still aim, which might sound weird for some people, but there should be an option to not auto-lock when locked on, if that makes sense, because then I can have the camera constantly be following someone, but I could still be like shooting over there, if that makes sense. I think that's a little thing that would make life much better for mouse and keyboard players like I. Another note is, so some weapons feel pretty great from the start. Sword always feels great. Some, honestly, don't. And the reason is because, differently than in Hades, when you like upgrade your weapon, you actually just change the aspect of it, right? But the original weapon also has an aspect, which is more boring, but it just gives you better stats. Here, that's not the case. If I want to upgrade this sword, the original form of the sword is just no upgrades. And that means I don't get to have the light attacks have more range and deal more damage. That's such a massive upgrade. That means that each weapon starts off weak. And unfortunately, some weapons really feel that way. I think it's this one, the bow staff. That bow staff right now feels pretty great, but originally it was 50% less range on it, and I just could not play with it. It felt so terrible, especially after I saw that there was an upgrade to upgrade the range. I was like, why does this feel so hard to use? Like, oh, it's because I have no range. That makes sense. I'm not too sure what they could have done, but I will say some weapons just don't feel great until you upgrade them, and that can be a little annoying at times. Not all of them, luckily enough. I think the bow and the sword really do feel great from the very beginning, but it's still something to keep in mind. Now, even though I did talk about the fact that there's a lot of ways to get the currencies that we mentioned at the beginning, I do want to mention that even though that's the case, I do feel like you are being offered room reward currencies fairly often. I think more than in Hades. At least it feels that way. I actually wish I could find more boons. I don't think there's it really feels bad, but I do think that with the amount of different currencies, you're sometimes being offered them as a room reward pretty often. And let's be honest, it's never really fun to go to the next room and your reward be something that's not going to impact your run. Maybe I'm alone on this, and it doesn't feel too off. One thing I will say, though, is that currency we talked about for the cosmetics, the cosmetic stuff for the currency is the only currency that doesn't actually help with your progression in the game. Yet it is being offered exactly the same way as other currencies. What I mean by that is, with a game this grindy, sometimes you're going to see a room reward that is just for cosmetics versus, you know, something that's actually gonna progress your game, make you stronger, make you unlock more things. And that sometimes can feel pretty bad. I do wish that the cosmetic currency was not offered as a room reward and instead offered some other way, because as a single player, doesn't feel great personally. I mean, a lot of people, you know, really want cosmetics as an upgrade and will consider it as part of, you know, game unlocks. But to me, especially with the very limited amount of cosmetics offered in the game, I just find it a little sad sometimes to see that as a room reward. You can more easily get stuck on walls. Simple thing, but in Hades, you can kind of dash through a lot more obstacles. Sometimes I take damage just because I'm on a tiny corner of a wall and I just can't dash through it. It doesn't happen super often, but when it does, it's kind of annoying, even here. So right now, if I'm against this table right here, I'm currently pressing up and left, and I cannot dash through that tiny angle right there. These kind of things, they're minor, but they're details that I like to talk about. I like the boss design of the game. I think the bosses are pretty cool. I think the final boss is super cool. One of the coolest boss fights I've played in an action roguelike in a while. I actually think it's better designed than Hades, in my opinion. But the elites that you will fight, a lot of them spawn enemies, and that can be pretty annoying. So if you have a strong build, doesn't matter. You're going to kill the elite pretty quickly. But if you do not have a strong build, these elites do not have a threshold as to when they want to stop spawning. It's not like once they've summoned 2 allies, as long as there's 2 allies, not going to continue spawning. No, they can spawn continuously. I've had runs where my build was not great, and I got into an elite fight that was like spawning a bunch of enemies, and I just got overwhelmed, and I just died. And I think there's a little bit of a balance issue here, where sometimes some elites just spawn too many enemies. If you're not really powerful, it can be overwhelming. I kind of wish there was a cap to how much they could spawn at the same time. I do think it's cool that elites spawn enemies. I usually talk about the fact that bosses or like fights should always have little mobs on the side so you can have multiple beneficial things from boons that do like, oh, on kill something happens, right? Because otherwise all their boons is like, oh, when you kill an enemy, blah 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 blah, they're completely useless against bosses and elites. So at least I'm happy that elites do that. But yeah, it does feel bad when you're not strong enough to deal with it, though. And in terms of the enemy design in general, I think they're pretty great. Although there's a lot of enemies that run away from you. A lot of enemies that just jump away from you, that run away from you. It can be pretty annoying. There's a lot of them in different biomes. I kind of wish enemies were getting closer to you so you could just be fast-paced. I mean, this is a game that wants to be fast-paced, right? So I think there's too many enemies that just go underwater, spawn somewhere else, an enemy that jumps around, an enemy that dashes from one area to... It can be a little annoying every now and then, especially if you're playing a build that's very slow, which can definitely happen. The true final boss, I will not spoil, but I've got to say, the fight was cool. but I didn't get anything from it. I completed the final true encounter, and it was a little quest I had to do, and it was cool. Which, by the way, I kind of wish there was more things to do with NPCs that would give you quests and stuff like that. But I completed the quest, I fought the true final boss, and nothing happened. I don't even know if I missed something, because I came back to the hub, and I saw zero difference. Like, not a statement, not a thing unlocked, nothing at all. So I don't know if they're going to add something to that or if that's just how it is, but that was pretty anticlimactic, especially with how cool the fight was. That was a little disappointing. And finally, the last thing I'll say is the goo. The goo in the world 2. I hate the goo. It's way too rough, in my opinion. That goo is terrible. You go in that goo, you can't dash away from it, you're super slow. I hate it. Please nerf goo. And yeah, that's all of my little notes and all my thoughts on the game. Overall, as a conclusion, yes, this is a copy of Hades, but copying Hades is hard. It requires a lot of work and a lot of content, and I think they did a really, really good job with this one, even though some things I think are a little too close, including music, certain sound effects, certain weapon attacks, certain boons, certain gods. There are a lot of similarities, but overall, the things that they've added are honestly even better than Hades. You know, the multiple choices of boons, but more importantly, the beginning of run thing where you can choose your weapon and your skill and have 4 characters. Wow. That is extremely impressive, and I really applaud them for having such unique diversity for each starting run. I love that. I hope and I think that the multiplayer should be really fun. I might try it with someone because I think it's such a really enjoyable game that I think I want to see the experience with more people. But yeah, I mean, overall, if you've liked Hades, this is the closest game I've seen to being a quote-unquote Hades clone without it being a negative thing. Hades is a fantastic game, and if they can actually replicate most of it correctly, then hell yeah. Then that's what Sworn is to me. It's a really, really nice rendition of Hades, and I love it. So yeah, give it a try, and that's about it.